Hey guys, this is Keenan Thompson. I have a problem with you. Yes, you. None of y'all told me that AutoTrader has millions of new and used cars that I can shop from home. I thought we were friends. I put smiles on your face, but I'm not smiling. No one told me that with AutoTrader, a dealer can deliver cars to my home or that I could shop by price on AutoTrader. No one. Consider this friendship that you just learned we had officially over. Finally, it's easy. AutoTrader.
When you order ahead in the McDonald's app, we'll bring your food to your car when you get here. It's our version of a VIP experience. Order ahead in the McDonald's app to save time. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's.
Welcome to the Sci-Fi Sci, a podcast about Black science fiction, fantasy, and staying on the same page in this amazing marriage. My name is Amber, and who am I joined by?
Ben.
Hey, Ben. And today on episode 20, we will be discussing the movie His House. This is a Netflix horror directed by a Black man, Remi Weekes, and it was pretty terrifying. Before we get into the movie, I just want to ask all you listeners out there, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you feel so inclined, you better feel inclined, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Those ratings really help get the word out there about Black science fiction and fantasy. And also, if you really feeling the kids, please go over to our Patreon. You can find that link in our bio. We have a link tree on Instagram. Just give a little something every month to help us produce this amazing show. Now, Ben, let's talk about this phenomenal movie.
I think I watched 10 minutes of it through my fingers.
Right.
It was so terrifying.
It was.
You know, I realized that we have such a stable life that I think watching horror movies sort of helps us bring some shared trauma, which is what this movie is all about.
It helps us bring shared trauma? What do you mean?
Yeah, I think you don't really know someone until you are in a highly stressful situation with them.
And so our shared trauma is watching horror films.
I know, isn't that really pathetic?
It's pathetic. But it's good. I mean, I don't need to share trauma with you. I can share cocktails and board games. I have shared trauma with, others, but I don't also need it with you right now.
Talking about trauma and shared trauma, happy Black History Month.
Wow. Black History Month is about, uplift and Black excellence.
I'm sorry, in elementary school, all I was taught about, Black history was slavery, I think.
Same.
I think most people, they're only taught about Black history is slavery, and then everything was okay after MLK.
Yeah, right. That's...
Who was fucking assassinated.
Listen.
I don't know, why do we end with Black History Month in elementary school in the 90s with everything being okay after MLK?
What do you mean?
It's slavery, and then nothing happened, and then Jim Crow.
Oh, that's so true. It's just because they want to, you know how teaching goes sometimes. It's I used this curriculum last year, let me just recycle it for this year. But that also happens with fun things, sadly. Mm-hmm. I used to really love putting on the Black History Month program at my old school. But I, too, even, I would start finding images of uplift and things like that. And then I would find, some really good important messages from Black Lives Matter and all these rallies. And so I was always torn between, should I just keep it about this? Or should I sprinkle a little bit of, people getting arrested and all these other injustices? I don't know. It's so hard. But I'm choosing this month to just keep it with the uplift, I guess, with the exception of this movie. and it's horror.
But there's also some funny parts in the movie as well.
Are there?
Yeah.
I think I missed those.
Yeah, there are some funny parts. So this movie is about a couple, Bull and Rial, two asylum-seekers who survived a torturous journey across the Mediterranean from Sudan, which I was reading about that journey, and a lot of people fucking drown making that journey across the Mediterranean Sea to seek for asylum. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it follows their struggle to assimilate in London, and it also addresses the trauma of surviving a civil war, and it deals with living in a dilapidated building that is actually haunted by a monster called an apeth or a night witch.
It's like, it wasn't enough that the freaking building was dilapidated. Like, that actually could have just been the horror story for me. But carry on.
Yeah, you know something about dilapidated buildings.
Just keep going. Why don't you just finish telling the people about the story?
I'm done. I think let's focus on dilapidated buildings, by the way.
Oh
and
my gosh.
Things running through the walls.
Yes. So, quick story time. A couple years ago, I would say almost 4 years ago at this point, I needed to move closer to my job. So I was really looking to relocate south. If you're not familiar with Chicago, there's like north side and south side and like, west side as well. But I taught on the south side of Chicago and I was living way far up north. So I was spending an hour to an hour and 45 if there was traffic commuting every day. So I was like, I need to move back south. But I was in a time crunch because my lease was running out with my roommate. So I had to find a house that I could afford, with my teacher earnings. And also I had a huge ass dog. And so if you live in apartments, a lot of places like they charge for dogs, and especially a dog that's like 80 pounds like Gucci. So I was on a time crunch and we were visiting your family that summer. So I was like, I gotta go get this dog and myself set up so I can meet Ben's family for the first time. Now that I think about this, was 5 years ago. Anyway, in a hurry to like make everything all perfect, I found this like amazing black couple in Bronzeville that just sort of posed themselves as like, we've been living in the neighborhood for years and we really like to rent out the room upstairs. So they lived on the first floor and I would live on the second floor. And the house was not finished, but I went to see the house maybe a month in advance. And I don't know how renovations work and shit like that. So I was like, oh, this can be done in a month, of course. As you can imagine, that shit was not even a little bit done. And so, I mean, even like simple things, y'all. I'm talking like knobs on doors. I remember the day I moved in, they were like, well, everything works but the kitchen and the bathroom. I was like, I'm sorry, everything works but the kitchen and the bathroom? So what, I cannot make any meals and I can't shit them out? Okay. I'd actually rather you not be done with the bedroom than the kitchen and the bathroom. And I mean, there were just so many issues with the house. I will say that I lived there for 4 months before me and a roommate wrote this like letter of all of the horrors of the house. And I didn't have to pay rent any of those 4 months. So I saved 4 months of rent so that I could move out because they couldn't charge me when simple things were happening. Like, Ben, do you remember one of the worst things that happens? Like, we needed a new paint job in one of the rooms. So they were like, oh, we're going to send somebody over to the house to paint. And so while we were out, they sent this couple over to the house to paint. Actually, they just sent him. He brought his girlfriend. I guess they had just went swimming or some shit in Lake Michigan. Okay. So I get there and I see water droplets because they're still soaking wet from this excursion. I go to the back room and these motherfuckers are turning up. Like, they're not having sex or anything, but they're just drinking wine out of a bottle and they're like painting the house. And I was like, hello? And they were like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. We got to get out of here because we didn't know what time you were coming. So let us clean up this room for you and then we'll go for it. And I was like, that's very odd that somebody who's painting a room wants to take out my trash now. Like, what the fuck is that about? Lo and behold, these motherfuckers were drinking wine out of my fridge, and they didn't want me to find out about it. And I knew it was a nice wine because somebody gave it to me when I moved in. They were like, oh, happy move, hope it goes well. I mean, that wine was probably cursed anyway, but like, have you ever come home and a service person was consuming your food or whatever? Like, I'm totally down to offer people water and shit, but taking wine from my fridge and drinking the shit.
No.
And that was half of it. Like, when the mice came, I was like, I gotta get the fuck up out of here. Because mice are like a true symbol that you have lost control of your life. Right, Ben? And then we moved into a house that had tons of other mice. You've had rodents before, haven't you, Ben?
Yeah. I lived in a house where there were squirrels running through the walls. And the way my landlord decided to deal with it is that one day she just came over and dropped a cat off at the house.
Yeah, classy. Trying to save money on this bitch.
What the fuck? Anyway, if you are a renter in Chicago,
ooh,
you will be taken advantage of. It's
Oh,
the
period.
nature of it.
And
It's
even-
really sick.
And, oh my God, Ben. I mean, this house could have been a freaking, docu-series on Netflix because I had two neighbors, like, oh, that beautiful, like, black couple. Yeah, they moved to Texas a month after I moved in.
And the woman was an alcoholic. I remember every time I saw her, she was like drunk out of her mind, whether it be
probably some heavy drugs as well.
8 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
But this house was huge. It was like 4 bedrooms. So me and my roommate each got 2 rooms to ourselves. Huge layout, but it just wasn't done.
Yeah, the molding on the side, there were just cracks everywhere. It just did not look good.
And also, it was a duplex, so there was a neighbor upstairs who was like a recluse who would blast music all freaking night long. He would occasionally come down and ask me for money. And then underneath, there was this guy who was recently released from prison for, let me say this honestly, raping a 15-year-old girl on the CTA. He was recently released from that charge that he had done 12 years prior, and he was hosting a full radio show out of his, like, not a podcast, a radio show. So there were people in and out. It was unsafe. There were no knocks, like no knobs on doors. I'm seriously shocked that I didn't get like attacked, because one time we did call the police for a noise complaint, and the next morning he got in my face and he was like, "Oh, so we calling the police now? Like, okay, well, next time you call the police, it's gonna be for a reason." I was like, "Huh?" And do you remember the blood on the stairs? It got crazy. It got crazy. I'm so glad I survived, because I was supposed to die in that house. I really was. Back to the movie.
The other thing that this movie does really well, besides showing the horrors of living in a house that's not maintained or cared about landlords, is it shows this gendered dichotomy, this gender separation when men try to take over fixing a house.
Ooh.
So the husband in this, Bull, tries to do all these jobs throughout the house, and he ends up like peeling paint and end up breaking a bunch of holes in walls. His reason is legitimate because there is this haunting that's going on in the house, but it made me think of how when I try to, DIY things in our house.
When you try to do what?
DIY. Is it DIY?
What do you think it is? What do you think the initials stand for?
Do it yourself.
Right.
So it's DIY.
And that, what just happened there, is truly a metaphor for what happens when you try to DIY.
I tried to fix something in our fridge, and I ended up spilling water everywhere. And finally, I just called a plumber, and the plumber fixed it within...
Oh, that broke because of you?
10 minutes. No, it broke because...
We kept moving the fridge.
The first time it broke, we kept on moving the fridge. But then when I tried to fix it, I just used the wrong material because I'm not a fucking plumber.
Yeah.
The other thing I did try to fix, though, was our washer and dryer. And I was actually successful in that. That did.
I would say altogether with everything going on, that took you about a month. But I will say, that shit works now, Ben. Like, it's hard to fix a dryer. Like, you were at it for hours. Whereas, like, I can't fix shit. I'm too impatient. I don't fully read the instructions, as you know. Don't look at me like that. I'm admitting it. I'm admitting it, right?
You also don't read dimensions of things when you order anything from Amazon.
I just said I don't read the instructions. Because the dimensions don't really matter. It's just like, fine.
What was your first impressions of this movie?
I really enjoyed this movie. It's not one of those movies that you would watch like over and over, but I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. And not to get into spoilers right now, but there were some really great twists at the end that I truly didn't see coming. I would have, and give me some credit, I'm really good at sort of predicting like you do a good job of predicting the overall plot, whereas I do a good job of like, that character is the villain. I know it. That character is the one who also has superpowers. I know it. Like, I'm good at that, but you're good at saying like, oh, you know what's going to happen overall with everybody. So I was still like had inklings about things, but wasn't sure. But the movie like just busted my head wide open. They were like, oh, you think you know the twist? Well, I'm gonna twist your twist. It was like that. What was your first impression of the movie?
It really made me understand that I think as someone who has a house, who lives in the country I was born in, who speaks the language of this country, I really have no fucking idea what it means to be an immigrant. And this film did a really powerful job of exploring this couple's trauma of going through a civil war, of traveling across the Mediterranean. And one of the big part of this trauma is that when they're traveling across the Mediterranean, their boat flips over and their daughter who was with them drowns. And you find that out in the beginning of the movie. And it's about them dealing with that trauma and also trying to fit in. So I was left feeling that you really have no idea. You cannot make an ethical judgment on their decisions because they do some pretty ethically questionable things. But when you're coming from a civil war, when you're coming from trauma,
shit gets real.
You do what you have to do. Despite all the horror of this film, there are some legitimately funny parts. And that sort of surprised me. I was like, oh, that's actually funny.
I'm really trying to think deep about what parts were funny.
So, in the opening scene of the movie, it's a flashback. Bull, the husband, is sleeping. He's dreaming. He dreams about his daughter drowning. And then when he wakes up, his wife, Rial, asks him, oh, what were you dreaming about? And of course, he lies to her, says, oh, I was dreaming about our marriage. And then her response is, oh, that explains all the screaming.
Oh, yeah, he was like, I dreamed about our wedding day.
Oh, yeah, our wedding day.
That was cute. I think she was trying to do that to be, like, cynical.
Yeah, it was a legitimately
It wasn't like a
part.
knee slapper. It was like, oh, that explains the screaming.
It sort of set up their relationship very well. And I often hate married couple films, but this is the ultimate married couple film. I think every married couple should watch this film.
I agree with that, Ben.
Because their marriage seems very tight and strong, but they also got problems.
We got problems.
They got problems.
Stanley from The Office. I mean, this is what marriage is. It's like, it's not. Well, I mean, for some people it is. You know, I've been watching Selling Sunset. Some people it really is like fancy and clean, but those gritty moments of like, wow, we're actually just trying to survive together, and let's show that. That is powerful. And also, I'll say this about just like the actors in general. I've never seen the leading man who played Ball, but we've seen Rial, the leading woman, because she plays Ruby Baptiste in Lovecraft Country. Powerful, powerful actress. I looked up her resume as well. She's been in literally so many things. She's going to be in the new Loki film coming out as well.
Loki TV show.
Mm-hmm.
Say it right.
Eat me. Okay. I was really... I said this to you at the minute the film started. So everybody knows I get on my high horse about like the rise of the Black British actor in America. And this is not an American film, and it is not played by African Americans. And it's so necessary that it's not, because as African Americans, I'll just speak for myself, I wouldn't know the first thing about like emotionally tapping into what it feels like to be an immigrant. Whereas the parents of maybe those actors or their parents know exactly what that feels like. And so, you know, it's not just me saying like British people can't play slaves. It's like, and we can't play immigrants. I'm sure there are movies where we have, but it doesn't register the same. Or like, on a separate tangent, like that's why it's a little bit challenging for me to watch like Coming to America, because it's like Eddie Murphy's playing this like African prince, and it's just like, this is not funny to me. Like, this doesn't, you know, like Coming to America was a huge cultural phenomenon. They're coming out with Coming to America, the second one, but it's like, I don't want to watch Eddie Murphy doing a fake Nigerian accent. Like, that's not my shtick.
Well, the creator of this movie, Remi Weekes, he says, quote, growing up in London as a person of color, a conversation we had in our community was of assimilation and how much of yourself do you give up or let go to give in. That's the crux of his house.
Right, which is definitely something an African American can relate to, but my parents obviously are very assimilated, very Americanized. Like we're so distant from whatever else it would be. Obviously, we have our own like Southern cultural nuances, but we're all very American. So they just killed it. I was like, they feel like true immigrants, like experiencing. They're also like, very well trained actors as well. But I don't think
your parents are well trained actors.
No, the two leading stars of this film. I just don't think like a fucking Halle Berry or Denzel could tap into that. They just couldn't. Maybe. I mean, Forrest Whitaker played like Last King of Scotland, so I mean, it can be done, obviously, but
he wasn't. Last King of Scotland wasn't an immigrant.
I know, but it was not an American story.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just taking like, I'm trying to make a point, and I feel like you're trying to stop me from making that point.
No, I
during Black History Month.
No, you're fine.
Did you miss? What was my point?
Your point was who has the right to play certain roles.
That's vague.
That's,
make my point more specific.
That's your question. Well, you're saying that just because a black person is black doesn't mean they should be playing a black role. And actually, this film addresses that directly. For example, at one point, once they're settled in London, Rial goes out and walks around, and she gets lost. And a very scary sort of scene, just walking on the streets and basically these projects. And she runs into these 3 high school boys who are obviously immigrants at some point, but she addresses them. And
they're black.
And they're black. They're black. And she addresses them and
she speaks
Dinka.
like Dinka, yeah.
She addresses them in Dinka and they don't understand her. And so they're like, speak English. And they sort of harass her, eventually give her directions. But as she's leaving, they yell at her, go back to Africa. And in that moment, you're like, oh, not all skin folk is kinfolk type of moment, right?
Oh, man.
I think that's what you're saying is that...
But it's deeper than that. It's like, I actually hate when people say that. Well, I don't hate when people say that. Let me take that back. But it's so much more layered than that. It's like these kids, not that we should excuse their harassment in any way, but it's not just like, oh, this... Like when people say not all skin folk is kinfolk, they're talking about like there's some shady black people out here, so just watch out because all your black people are not your friends, which is true, but it's like, no, these kids act this way because they have been assimilated for so long. Like it's not just unique to those 3 boys,
but also the film doesn't show them with white people. It's 3 black kids together.
Right, but there's...
And so they themselves haven't even fully assimilated.
Right, good point. But also those 3 black kids are wearing their like fancy school attire. So they're in their like shirt and tie.
I think that's
from school.
That's
like,
pretty standard.
It's standard, but you didn't see the white kids in their school attire, Ben.
Yeah.
So I think they made a choice to show like, well, these boys go to school here now and they're, you know, completely ingrained in the community. Now, are there some shady-ass, snake-ass black people that exist in the world? Of course, because we're not a monolith. But I don't think that is a good example of not all kinfolk is skinfolk.
Well, I was quoting it from a Roger Ebert review.
I'm sorry, Roger Ebert said that?
From his website. I think he's dead.
Oh, okay. I'm saying somebody on the Roger Ebert team
Did you read the review I sent you? She doesn't read everything
I don't read everything you send me because you send it like in the 11th hour. But I don't remember seeing that part. I'll go back and look at it.
A little bit of plot. Once they've crossed the Mediterranean, they've made their way to this part of England. They mention London, but the person's like, sure, I guess, maybe London. They're held in a detention center. Mm-hmm. And then they're given parole and given a place to stay. And their caseworker, Mark, who is the wonderful Matt Smith, one of the Doctor Who's.
Right. You immediately jizzed yourself.
I got very excited. But this is no Doctor Who.
It ain't.
Mark is an asshole. and he is a caseworker, and he basically just sees it as a job. And Matt Smith will say, repeatedly, this house is bigger than my house. Because, like your situation, Amber, you had a very big apartment for Chicago, but it was just terrible, right? Just absolutely nasty. And so there's this very insidious anti-immigrant type of sentiment that Mark has. And at one point, he says, I used to be a banker until they moved all the jobs overseas, giving this indication that immigrants are coming here to steal our jobs type of thing. It's very subtle, but there's that intense anti-immigration aspect to it.
Hell yeah. I mean, that just rings so true and unique. I mean, be one of the good ones is language that I've heard on a job. It's like, don't be like them. Come on time. And I just wish I was brave enough in the past to be like who? No, name, like, say it specifically. Who do you mean, and what characteristics are you tying with that group of people? I want to actually hear you say it. Bitch.
Also, something that I laugh ironically every time I hear this is the phrase detention center, because it is a prison. They are kept in this tiny room at the beginning of the movie. I mean, probably a little bit the size of a bathroom, maybe a little bit bigger, but it's them and another person that you don't know. And they're just literally crammed into these tiny spaces. And it is really depressing, those detention centers. They're prisons.
Yeah.
And I remember in college, I was working with an organization called the Catholic Worker. I would go to their roundtable discussions. I would go to protests with them. And one of the protests that I went to was standing outside a detention center in New York City, where they just hold nonviolent, undocumented folks. And it's horrific. And even in Chicago, you can go see that in immigration court. They walk them in, nonviolent, undocumented immigrants, in handcuffs, and it's like, what?
Right. Oh,
it's really awful. It's very depressing. But in this scene at the beginning of the movie, when they're being led to parole and being let out of the detention center, they look in one of the rooms, and one of the other immigrants has tried to kill himself.
Yeah.
And has cut their wrists. And so this movie is showing, the true horror in really great horror films is never the supernatural element, right? Mm-hmm. And this movie is hard to watch for those kinds of scenes. Yeah. And then it's also terrifying because they introduced this night witch, the Apeth.
Yeah, that's why I hate when people are Americans are like, this is the best country ever, and aren't you proud to be from here, and whatever. It's like, you didn't do shit to be born here. You did not manifest that. You did not do something in a past life. You were just fortunate enough to be born on this soil, and how dare you condemn other people. And I remember I'm from Georgia, and when Hurricane Katrina hit, we had a lot of students from New Orleans come to our school, and they were so mistreated by so many peers. So one, I didn't have classes with any of these students because I was in accelerated classes, and they were these students, and it wasn't a whole bunch because Georgia and Louisiana are very far apart, but all of these students were put on a lower academic track. So I never shared any classes with this group of kids. So they were all assumed, because of this horrible flood, they were all assumed to be like, well, y'all don't know anything, you're not educated, we're going to put you in these lower classes academically. And then even, I remember classmates at lunchtime, making fun of their accents, or there was this one guy, his name was Curtis. He was fine as fuck. I vividly remember he was fine as fuck. We rode the bus together. That's how I got to know him, but I never took any classes with him. And one day, how some days at school, well, maybe you don't because you were homeschooled, but some days at school there's Fridays where everybody brings a dish, or whatever prepared by their family. And it doesn't have to be anything like super cultural. It could just be like, oh, bring a pot of macaroni and cheese or whatever. So this one class had a potluck. And I remember when I was in maybe 6th grade or so, Curtis got on the bus with this huge tin full of jambalaya. And it was the end of the day. And the jambalaya was still full. I cannot believe I'm remembering this. And I was like, what's up, Curtis? He always played cool. I was like, what's up? I was like, why do you have this big tin? He was like, oh, there was like this potluck thing in one of my classes today. I was like, damn, that looks good. He's like, yeah. And I watched him get off of the bus and throw it in the trash can. Because, and as the bus drove off, I remember kids being like, yeah, nobody wanted to eat that shit. Like, whatever. Like, we've never seen that shit. Because we don't eat jambalaya. I mean, I'm sure there are like South Georgia homes that make jambalaya, but they were like not familiar with it, and so people. And
Curtis was one of the students from New Orleans.
Yes. He, and who knows if
he immigrated. When you think about it, that situation, like you're an asylum seeker, even in the United States,
even in
right?
The US. So his home had flooded. He had been completely taken out of his ward, forced into our school, forced on a lower academic track, and he tried to participate and probably brought the best fucking potluck dish in the group, and nobody wanted to eat his food because people would be like, well, he stinks, he's whatever. And it was just the saddest thing ever to see, for me, a huge tin foil full of rice and sausage and shrimp be discarded. That's the real horror of this entire story, right? All of that rice being wasted. But I remember getting home and I was asking my mom, I was like, this kid at my school made this like jambalaya thing and nobody ate it. She was like, what are you saying? But I now know like there were just so many layers to that. I cannot believe I remember that. But that shit was so freaking sad. I think you do all of that. And I know that if Curtis had immigrated from like Germany or Japan, because at one point we had like Japanese students immigrate to our school. Yeah. They were treated like the coolest motherfucking kids in school. Why? Because they had all these like cool MP3 players and gadgets and tools that we didn't have here. And why do I know that they were treated that well? Because I was in gifted classes and they were just put into those classes. You know what I'm saying? So it's anti-black when it comes to immigration or like Mexican families, Puerto Rican families, but like when Canadians and, French students immigrate, even though Curtis could speak French, they're just treated like trash.
Yeah. I think that brings up this really strong point where immigrants, especially black immigrants, are compared to African Americans who've been here since the time of slavery, right? And they're compared together. When in actuality, we should be looking at statistics, looking at black immigrants and white immigrants. And we should be asking ourselves, why are white immigrants always outperforming black immigrants? Because that is the case. Generally, immigrants, when they come, they end up doing a lot for a country as an immigrant. But oftentimes, when I'm, hearing about comparisons in black communities, you're comparing black immigrant families to African American families or African immigrants to African American families. And that comparison just is not the comparison we should be looking at. We should be thinking, why are German immigrants and why are Chinese immigrants are outperforming better than African immigrants? Oh, because that's a layer of anti-blackness.
Yeah, when you're like put into I would love to hear, we're going to go on a tangent now based on our own teaching and personal experience, which is cool with me. But like, I remember when I was a high school teacher and I would have like Haitian students being like, why am I in this class? Like, why have I been placed here when I literally have shown you like the data that supports like I can perform better than this? But like all of my like Nigerian students, my Haitian students, and these kids can speak like 2, 3, 4 languages, are just put places without someone actually saying like, did we actually run a test on how they can perform? I mean, I would love to hear, because your school is very diverse, actual different countries.
No, it's a serious problem because my gifted classes have no black students, and that's been brought up quite a bit. Like, all my black students are in my like regular classes, and then all the Latino students are in the gifted class. So I have a few Polish students, and then the rest are Latino and African American or black students.
Right. I mean, the only reason I was like properly placed in, I mean, you can take a wild guess why I was properly placed in those gifted classes.
Yeah.
Marsha Thomas, all day. She taught at the school, and then she became a principal. So when it came to if I was not qualified to be in the class, like, she'd be like, yo, but if I had the receipts, I mean, I was in those classes.
Yeah.
And I was one of few black people in those classes. And I knew friends of mine that were just as intelligent as me that were not in those classes.
I think oftentimes a lot of this horror that this film, let's get back to the film, His House shows, are being perpetuated by other humans. So, for example, there are lots of creepy parts in this, but the creepiest part is at one point Bull walks outside to take out trash, and people have been like pissing in their yard and have been like dumping their trash in their yard. And so that's horrific. But then he walks outside to take out trash at one point. He looks up, and there's this creepy ass, like, pale white woman with white hair smoking a cigarette.
It's like way scarier than the actual ghost.
Oh my gosh. It is very terrifying.
There's nothing more terrifying than a white woman in her window.
Yeah, let's get into the actual ghost. So
the white woman.
The white woman is the actual ghost. And at one point she says, why don't you just leave? They're going to kick you out anyway. So a big part of this is that as Bull is starting to clean the house and fix up the house, he starts to hear these voices. And he starts to hear like patter through the walls. And then he starts getting these visions of people who are drowned, and specifically his daughter who was drowned, and she is coming towards him whenever the light is out, and it's very scary.
I'm
and
like
so
putting
at
my
one
head down
point,
now,
and he's hearing it in the wall. So at one point he like peels all the wallpaper apart, and then just like starts busting the walls open. And part of that is to find the person. The other part is to set up the electrical wiring, which he ends up doing. And I was like, oh, the DIY. I feel you. I've tried to do that before. I wouldn't do any electrical wiring. So he's trying to fix this house, and he gets the electrical wiring working, and he tries to go out and like buy clothes and buy furniture. And all the time this is happening, Rial, his wife, is also talking to the ghost. So it's not just in his mind, right? So this is an actual real ghost haunting. It is his daughter, and it is the people who have been drowning. And what we discover is that when they were trying to leave Sudan, they were trying to get on a bus, and spoiler, and they end up taking a girl and claiming that it's their daughter.
Like Titanic.
Like Titanic.
Like when he's like, please, I have a child.
And so they get onto this bus that they escape this village that is being shot up and destroyed. And in your mind, like, how could you do that? Because as they take this daughter, her actual mother is running down the road, shouting at them, riding this bus as militants are coming into the village, shooting everybody and killing everybody. And you're like, how could you steal a child like that? And I think as American viewers, like, yeah, sure, we can ask that question, but we can't really ask that question,
we
right?
Cannot.
Because this is a family. Rial and Bull, they had jobs. Like, they had a life there. And they took everything and had to leave. And Rial's, all her family, she sees murdered and shot and butchered. And they are leaving, and so they, Bull just did the only thing he could think of was snatch a little girl and use that as bartering. And like, how could you do that? And it's like, well, in a situation of high stress and anxiety, like you do what you have to do. And so because they've done this like great transgression, they are being haunted by a night witch, an apeth, who requires like a blood sacrifice because of this great transgression. And that ends up being like the whole conflict of the film. Go for it.
All I was gonna say is just like, if you need an example of like how do things get crazy, like go from 0 to 100 with air quote civilized people involved, like Firefest is just a great example of that, because these are rich ass fucking millennials who were not fed for like 24 hours and they lost their shit. They lost their fucking shit.
There was like violence. People were stealing.
Tents.
Like, I think there was like rape. There was rape as well.
I don't know. I can't. I don't want to confirm things that I definitely don't know happen for sure. But like when rich people are not given food for 24 hours, things got real.
And
primitive.
they went Lord of the Flies. Yeah.
They went full ass tribal warfare. So I don't want to hear shit about like. And we saw it on the Titanic. It's like all these rich people, this ship is sinking, and even Cal, who was made to be the villain, like when he stole a child to get on a safety boat, you kind of just got to be like, yeah, that tracks. Because
of this apeth haunting the house, and the conflict between the husband and wife gets intense, the wife, Rial, says, we have to go back. We have to go back. We can't stay here anymore. This apeth is going to keep haunting us. And Bull reacts not well. He doesn't take that well because he really wants to fit in. So as they're being haunted, at one point they get a visit from Mark, who does like checkups. He's their caseworker.
Doctor Who. Mm-hmm.
Doctor Who. He comes and he is looking at their house. He's seeing that there's holes in the wall. It just doesn't look good. Bull looks very stressed out. You know, as he was fixing things, he like cut his hand. He got blood on his like nice new shirt. He's probably not sleeping well.
Yeah, his bloodied like colonized shirt is just like,
yeah,
so well done.
It's a great image. And so Mark is asking Bull like what's going on, and Bull's like, no, everything's okay. And of course, this is like what horror movies do. It's you deny anything is wrong, nothing supernatural. But this is actually a funny scene. The great scene is that Rial walks in. It's like, oh, in English, because most of the time they're speaking Dinka to each other if white people are around. But Rial walks in and is like, oh, in English, did you tell them about the night witch that's haunting you?
And she's in like full traditional
garb.
She's
in like traditional garb and sort of like giving off this image that they're crazy. But of course, the night witch is actually real. And Mark, the caseworker, who is there with another caseworker that we don't get their name, they leave the house and they're like, oh my gosh, like they're done. They're going to be deported.
God, was she wearing the bed sheets?
Yeah, it's not a good look. And that scene was great for a couple of reasons. One, it sort of fucks with this trope of like, you know, we're gonna deny anything supernatural. No, just tell people straight out because they're not gonna fucking believe you anyway. And then also Rial makes a statement like they already see us as crazy.
Yeah.
Like, let's just give them what they already see us to be.
I don't even think she's giving them anything. She's just like, let's just be ourselves because they're never going to accept us anyway. So let's just, like, where's the harm in actually just being true to thine self?
Yeah. Bull does not take... Yeah, Bull does not take that well. And he's like, fuck no. This is my house. His house. That's sort of the phrase. His house. Whether the his, I'm not really sure. Is it Bull's house, or is it Mark the caseworker's house, or is it the night doctor's, the Apeth's house? That's a great question. But what we know for sure, this is not Rial's house.
Right.
And Bull sort of goes psycho and breaks all the locks in the doors, like covers all the windows, and locks Rial in the house.
And is trying to force her to assimilate, like...
And Rial's not having it.
Yeah, like she eats food with her fingers because that's what they did in her village and her tribe. And Bowl is constantly like trying to get her to use
the fork.
the fork and the
And
knife.
she's like, it tastes like metal. Like, why would I put metal in my mouth? And I was like, oh yeah, why do we put metal in our mouth?
Yeah, she's just not. I loved her character so much. She's just like, I don't give a fuck about fitting in. I'm never gonna be accepted by these people, so I might as well just like stick to who I am.
So essentially, Rial makes a decision after being locked into her house. She makes a decision to escape, but through her, she's unable to escape. But she does end up having a conversation with the Apeth. And the Apeth says, I'll let you go, but you have to kill your husband.
I really love that the film showed Rial speaking to the Apeth, even though like we can't see that physical presence there. Like she's clearly communicating and having this like discourse with the ghosts. And I appreciate that because it didn't vilify the ghosts and the religion, which... Nisi talked about that in a previous interview. Nisi Shaw, the author, if you haven't listened to episode 19, do that. Nisi Shaw talks about how we vilify a lot of like black religions and black supernatural things. And so when Ball is being haunted because he's like not listening to these ghosts and Rial is not being haunted by them because she's embracing them, it really makes the Apeth not seem as scary. Like we are taught to be afraid of the ghost or afraid of the supernatural and the magical, but when given those two different perspectives and those dichotomies, we were able to be like, oh, the Apeth is not the actual villain here. It's like, Ball, you stole someone's child. Like, this is the natural, supernatural consequence for stealing a human being. That, like, even Rial was like, no, you need to, like, this ghost is telling me that you stole from him. Like, the fuck? Because, I mean, in what movie does one entity get along with the ghost and the other, like, does it? Like, I'm really trying to think about that.
The ending of the movie, Rial, is allowing... Rial ends up not killing her husband, but Rial allows the ghost to start to take over Bull's body. Mm-hmm. And basically, the Apeth wants a body to take over, and that will stop the haunting. But then Rial ends up making the decision to kill the Apeth.
Did you see that coming? Because I didn't.
I did, yeah. I mean, yes, I figured that, but it was slightly confusing because the Apeth, you're saying the Apeth isn't representative of evil, but the Apeth is scary as shit. Once you see the full embodied Apeth, it's like this mummified monster, and it's trying to, like, possess and kill Bull through this like really fucked up scene where he like tries to get underneath his skin through a cut. It's
it's terrifying, visceral. But I would try to do that if somebody stole my child. Well, you want to get into the size?
Yeah, I guess I was slightly confused why Rial killed. Yeah, I was slightly confused by that, but there wasn't a whole lot of size as far as that because you are dealing with supernatural, so I can sort of like hand wave.
I think Rial was like, hold the fuck up. I'm not just gonna let somebody kill my man out here. Like, then who will I have? I don't even know this child. Like, fuck out of here.
Well, she wants to go and find the child, and so you're sort of teased at one point that
but the child does come back the minute he is given as a blood sacrifice.
Yeah.
The minute Ball is given as a blood sacrifice, the child comes back in human form. Mm-hmm. And you think in your brain, like, this child and Rial are going to live together.
That would have been
strange.
A more compelling alternate ending where the Apeth possesses Bull's body and then the Apeth and Rial live together with, like, the embodied child who comes back. That would have been strange, but I don't really know the Dinka mythology behind the Apeth, and that's something that is building on actual mythology.
I love that. I love when we learn some like actual folklore.
Yeah. But the ending of the movie though, they get rid of the Apeth, but they don't get rid of the ghosts.
I thought the ghost was the Apeth.
No, so the Apeth is the night witch, but then there are all these other ghosts as well.
Oh, ghosts.
Ghosts, right. It's all the people who were drowned.
Say ghosts, plural.
Ghosts. Anyway, they get rid of the Apeth. The end of the movie, though, they're still haunted by the apparitions.
I think that's a fair trade.
They're still haunted by the apparitions. They still see the child that they stole and took away from her mother and who drowned.
I think there's a level of comfort there as well, because all of the ghosts are black and brown people, and it's like, sadly, these ghosts might be our only community, these lost lives. Like, when I saw the house full of people on each side, I wasn't as much scared as I was like,
yeah,
wow, they're not alone.
Yeah, so the movie ends with this incredibly beautiful, compelling scene where Rial and Bull are just standing in their apartment, and they've had another meeting with Mark, their caseworker. Their caseworker looks like it's not going to kick them out. They're not going to be deported. But as the caseworker leaves, Rial and Bull are standing there. They look across the room and they see the child who died, and then it cuts back to them, and then now the entire room is filled with what you are supposedly to presume immigrants who've come over, and then it cuts back to the child, and the room is filled with the child and a bunch of other immigrants as well, and so you're left with this haunting image that Bull and Rial are never going to get rid of their haunting. Like, yeah, sure, they got rid of the Night Doctor, this, maleficent, malevolent spirit, but they're still going to be haunted.
Is that haunting, though? If I was going to be haunted by ghosts the rest of my life, but they were like ancestors and hardworking black people of the past, I wouldn't.
Yeah, but it's not, because at one point you see Rial, who's supposedly a school teacher, being led out of a school that has been completely shut up, and all those people who have
haunted by the images,
haunted by the images and the death and the violence that she saw, that she's going to carry that with her for the rest of her life, and she's going to.
Well, that's how trauma works. I mean,
yeah, right. I think that is what we would call the true haunting.
Yeah, I didn't equate the house filled with immigrants as the people who like died in the school. That's not immediately what I thought about when I saw their faces. They were like all standing upright and strong, and
yeah, I think it's this balance, right, where Bull and Rial are survivors, and there's this level of survivor guilt, because remember, the majority of the hauntings are coming from the fact that they survived this crossing. And I was reading, there's an article, we'll put it in the chat, but a lot of Sudanese men drown, and their bodies are washed up on the shore as they're making this trip across the Mediterranean. It's a common thing, and so this film is building on that. There's a survivor's guilt that Bull and Rial have.
Yeah. Why don't you warp up the show?
In conclusion, support immigrants. Watch His House. Be fucking kind to someone if they don't speak English and they're getting bullied or being mistreated, whether it's at the grocery store, whether it's at your job. Have some fucking empathy.
And tip, baby.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Sci-Fi Sci. We will be reading next week. Next week, I'm reading my very first high fantasy novel, Master of Poisons by Andrea Hairston. So you might want to get it on audiobook, but be sure to pick up that big old juicy book. We're going to be talking about that for episode 21. Please keep liking and supporting the show, and we'll be here every week to talk about Black science fiction and fantasy. Bye, y'all.
Hey guys, this is Keenan Thompson. I have a problem with you. Yes, you. None of y'all told me that Auto Trader has millions of new and used cars that I can shop from home. I thought we were friends. I put smiles on your face, but I'm not smiling. No one told me that with Auto Trader, a dealer can deliver cars to my home, or that I could shop by price on Auto Trader. No one. Consider this friendship that you just learned we had officially over. Finally, it's easy. Auto Trader.
When you order ahead in the McDonald's app, we'll bring your food to your car when you get here. It's our version of a VIP experience. Order ahead in the McDonald's app to save time. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's.